Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the GoBeercats podcast. I am your host, Brandon, and right from the jump here, we are joined once again by the Hall of Famer himself, Jim Kelly Jr. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Brandon. Happy to be here.
I always love talking to you. One, your depth of knowledge around the program, and especially more than anything, your energy and your passion that you have for it certainly comes out every time I hear you talk about it as well. I know that's something our listeners can feed off of, and I'm sure is a big reason why you are such a beloved figure around Cincinnati still. So I'm glad that we can find time. It's been about a year since I talked to you last. I'm glad we were able to work this out and get you back on this evening.
Well, appreciate you having me. Yeah. And, I like to think that I'm, the passion in the program. And I don't want to say a cheerleader, but certainly I want the best for the Bearcats. And we've all had a lot to, be happy about the last couple of years. This past season, the season of 22, the fall of 22, maybe not what everybody wanted. But honestly, I think it came out the way that everybody expected it. The Bearcats were going to be a little bit down, and you would have loved to have seen them beat Tulane and get into the conference championship game. But honestly, they weren't as good as Tulane this year. So I think it finished up the way that we all thought it might. And but at the same time, the future's bright. Obviously, some changes with a new coach, a new staff, the transfer portal, which we can get into a little later, is crazy as far as, kind of knowing your team, so to speak. But all is good. All is good in Bearcat land. And last but not least, the biggest thing is, and I guess officially in a couple months here, we'll be part of the Big 12.
I think 2 months from today, as we
I think it is. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Yep.
not that I'm counting or anything.
No, but that's an exciting thing when you look at the schedule and you realize that you're playing in the Big 12, and you have people like Oklahoma and Baylor coming in here to town, not to mention people that we've seen before in West Virginia and UCF, but some of the newer ones, and then on the road at Oklahoma State. I think that's an exciting ththing as well. So great future ahead. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Jim, now before we get too far into everything I want to talk about, we'll talk about the draft that just took place this weekend, as well as get into some of the happenings around the team now, as you mentioned. Before we get into all of that, this is really the first time we've tried video with the podcast, as myself and the podcasts Viva La Cats and Cincy Slangin' are kind of teaming up and putting on this new sort of fan interaction website, social media thing with the Cats Keller Social Club. Those guys have been encouraging me. I'm the last holdout from doing video. So if everything goes according to plan, this will be the first episode available on YouTube. So fingers crossed that works out. It's the first time. I don't know. We'll see. If you see my cat dive bomb off the shelf behind me or something, just roll with it. We'll see what happens. So there's that for us. And then, of course, if you're a listener to the show, before we dive too far into everything, it is time for a beer. So this is the first look at the can here. First look, usually this is all audio, right? So this is from 18th Street Brewery out of Hammond, Indiana. I have not visited this place before, although I've had a handful of their beer. It's a hazy IPA, 5.5%, so not too crazy here for a Monday evening. And this is what I'll be sipping on throughout the show, which people will actually get to see if everything goes according to plan. So cheers, Jim. I'll ask before I sip, are you drinking anything while?
Well, I had some pasta tonight, and I've got a little bit of white wine left here. So I'm normally a beer guy, that, but not tonight. A little bit of wine, so a little different.
Very nice. Very nice. That's nice. That's crisp, hoppy,
good,
but light as well. So you could, at 5.5, you could probably have a couple of those, and
yeah, That's not over the top. That won't put you under quickly. That's good.
Absolutely. Jim, let's get into it. Like I said last time you and I talked, we recapped 9 different Bearcats drafted to the NFL. Of course, Sauce Gardner being sort of the marquee name who could walk the walk and talk the talk, and it turns out he could do exactly that as the defensive rookie of the year for the Jets. This year, our list isn't quite as extensive, with just 3 guys going being officially drafted, and I'll kind of let you kind of pick where we kick things off. If you want to, which guy you want to talk about, or which guy
Yeah,
you think got the best fit, or how you think they'll do in the NFL. I'll let you kick it off and pick who we start.
sure. Well, I mean, I think if you go back to kind of piggybacking on what you said, Brandon, in reference to the 9 guys last year, I don't think anybody expected that this year. If you looked on paper, there was expectations that maybe 6 of them would go. And honestly, I thought that was high. The 3 guys that did go, I pretty much thought those guys would go. It was hard to kind of figure out exactly where they would go. Quite honestly, Tyler Scott was probably getting the highest grades, at least towards the end of as we got closer to the draft. And for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And the one that I really thought would get drafted, and I was really thought that he deserved it, was Ivan Pace. Only because, sure, people, when he left high school and came to college, people questioned his height. When he was leaving college and going to the NFL, people were questioning his height. But, defensive player of the year in the MAC, then what he did this year, this last year at Cincinnati. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. I thought people would take a shot at him, and obviously Minnesota did as a free agent, but I thought he would get drafted. But let's go back to your point, and we'll start with the draft picks. Not surprised Trey Tucker went in the 3rd round. He is just a gifted receiver in reference to running routes, catching the football. But where I think probably the Raiders, who picked him in the 3rd round, want to utilize him as well as at the receiving side is in the return game. And the reason I say that, he's obviously been a great kickoff returner in his career at Cincinnati. I think, 2 for touchdown, maybe 3. But this past year when Ryan Montgomery got dinged up as a punt returner, Trey Tucker stepped in with no practice and did a phenomenal job. So I think the upside in reference to his return game is really there. Obviously, his 4.38, or depending on what he ran in the combine, he's definitely sub 4.4. That helps. He's not a big guy, so I think that hurt him a little bit. Probably hurt Tyler as well. But that being said, and if you've ever had a chance to sit down and talk to Trey Tucker, that is probably something that pushed him up in the draft as well. Just a wonderful young man, smart guy, got it all together, and is going to be a success if he doesn't make it in the NFL, which I think he will. Obviously the NFL tenure is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 years. Hopefully he makes it a lot longer than that, but whatever he ends up doing after football, he's going to be great at it. He's just a great kid. And I think the Raiders did a good job of picking him. In Tyler's case, he probably runs a little bit better route than Trey. He's a little bit taller, probably on that right at that 6-foot range. They might have him listed at 6'1", but not much over 6 foot. But he's very fluid in his speed, and then what he's able to do after the catch. And I think, and I'm going back on this, and this is something Dan Horton and I talked on the broadcast a whole lot about. I think his last 11 touchdowns were over 20 yards. He did not have a touchdown catch under 20 yards his last 11. So he's with the Bears. He went in the 4th round, for those that didn't follow it. He went in the 4th round to the Bears, and I think he's going to be very successful there as well. Obviously, he can take to use an old school term, take the top off the defense with his speed. But he can also he can break it off and cut it back underneath, catch the football, and what he does really, really well is run with it, after he makes the catch. And then in the 5th round, Josh Wiley, taken by the Tennessee Titans. I think that's fabulous, because I honestly think, and I'm not sure, I'm going to say Luke Fickell's offense, but you might say Gino Guidugli's offense, or, whatever, the Bearcat offense, I think the tight ends were underused, and Josh Wiley's upside is very, very big. And I think the Titans look at him at 6'6", 245, and honestly, I'm sure there was some communication there with Coach Fickle in reference to such a tight organization with Coach Fickle that probably said, what do you think of Josh Wiley? And, I honestly could see Luke saying the same thing I just said. We underutilized him. So really good to hear that. And the one thing, if I look at those three guys and I go back to your point of the 9 guys last year, and one of those guys was Alec Pierce. Okay, so I throw him into this mix. You got 4 receivers that went, 3 this year, 1 last year. And if you go back 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, that wide receiver room, and throw the tight ends in there, make those combined rooms. Now you did have Josiah DeGuara, who was leaving for the NFL. But if you looked at those young tight ends, Lenny Taylor and Josh Wiley, and you looked at those wideouts, that room was the weakest spot on the team. And then to have 3 guys this year, 1 guy last year come out of there and get drafted, how about that? That's phenomenal.
That's a good point. That is a really good point. And that's kind of like a major weakness that the team has right now is the wide receiver room. We'll get into that, a little later.
But that goes back to that point about the transfer portal. I mean, obviously they lost everybody, and now they've done a good job of replenishing it. And like you said, we'll get into that in a little bit. But all in all, I think for those 3 guys, very, very good. The fact that Ivan Pace didn't get drafted, I think that hurts him a little bit just from a monetary standpoint. I think he's the kind of guy that when we're watching the Vikings next year, we're going to see him playing. But it's a shame that he didn't get drafted.
Jim, to circle back to your point about Josh Wiley being underutilized in the offense, which I think I would 100% agree with you. If I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, even though he was underutilized, I believe he still set the UC record for most touchdowns by a tight end.
That's correct. That's correct. He did, and the good part is he had a long career. And the COVID year in there, although it was a short year, so that helped him a little bit. And I will say. Dan made this point on I forget what game it was. It wasn't the Tulane game. The game before that, Josh Wiley with a catch surpassed me to jump into whatever spot in career yardage, and I couldn't have been happier about that. Number one, he's a great kid. He's a LaSalle kid. I'm a Moeller guy, so we're GCL brothers, and you just wanted the best for Josh. But he did. He absolutely became the all-time leading touchdown reception leader for a tight end in Bearcat history. And, you're right. You can make the point, well, he wasn't underutilized if he caught whatever touchdown. I don't have the number in front of me. But at the same time, I really think there could have been a lot more there. But there was a lot of weapons that, Desmond Ridder and last year Ben Bryant had to throw to. And, they moved the football last year, even though you would have liked to have seen the tight ends catch a few more passes.
Yeah, and then like you said, we in the last 2 years, 4 wide receivers drafted. That kind of just plays into the fact of how many weapons Dez and then Ben Bryant had at their disposal, which might you could argue played into the success of the program as well. I want to ask you, because the 3 guys that were drafted went into 3 sort of very different and very unique situations with quarterback. So Trey Tucker, like you said, probably be playing on special teams as a returner, and then maybe get slotted in at times as a slot receiver. I think that would probably fit his style.
That's where I would see him fitting in, yes.
So if I'm not mistaken, I know there's been a decent amount of quarterback movement in the NFL this year, but I believe Jimmy Garoppolo will be the quarterback for
That's
the Raiders. Correct. Which I think he's more than serviceable as quarterback. He can certainly sling the football around. Tyler Scott at Chicago with Justin Fields. That's a unique situation. And then Josh Wiley who knows what the Titans are doing, really. I think Tannehill is still there. Malik Willis, who they took last year, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And then now they just took highly publicized Will Levis in the second round. So that situation is a little unique, I guess. So who do you think went into like the best situation as far as who will be throwing the football around to him?
Right. Well, I mean, if you look at the quarterbacks that you just mentioned, and I thought the Tennessee situation was the most unique. And I read a couple articles this week where, yes, you are, their starter is there. And Malik Willis was the guy that he was the heir apparent. And what I read this week was with Levis that they pretty much given up on Willis. So, at least that's what it's sounding like. Now, again, you got a guy with second year. He may come out and be, all pro this year. You don't know that. But Tannehill, I think it's the starter, and you've got a steady guy there. I think that's good for Wiley. He's such a unique guy because, he's he'd be classified as a tight end, but he's 6'6", 235. I won't say skinny, but he's thin, and he's that kind of that hybrid spot where he can play in the slot and be that big slot guy, coming across the middle. Now, problem is, can he take those safeties pounding on him all the time as he comes across in that 6'6" frame? But I think he can, and I think they'll certainly utilize him as we saw the Bearcats do down, particularly at the goal line where he can get up in the air. In Trey Tucker's case with Garoppolo, you've got another guy that's been there, done that. So I think that's a little bit more steady. But also they picked up Michael Mayer in the second round, the tight end from Covington Catholic who went to Notre Dame. So I mean they're loading up on big time on targets. And if you look at Trey, the punt return, kick return part of it is one of it. But the other thing that he did so well, he was a gunner on the punt team with Cincinnati. And my God, that kicking team, that punting team that the Bearcats had, they were unbelievably. Kerry Combs coached them, and they were very, very good. In Tyler's case, that's a weird situation up there. I really thought the Bears might make a change, but it appears they're not going to. And, I hope Tyler blocks well because Justin Field likes to run a lot. So,
Yeah.
But that being said, that's one of those things where Tyler's speed down the straight flat out speed down the field might be a situation where it really comes into play for the Chicago Bears.
So if we switch gears here a little bit, Jim, there was 6 players. You've already kind of mentioned Ivan Pace, who I would have, I guess I could have put money on it with sports betting in Ohio. Now I didn't. Right. I really thought that he would have been drafted for sure. Another guy who I was pretty high on who would get drafted is Arquan Bush. Both of those guys did get picked up in the undrafted free agency pool, but we had 6 guys total out of the undrafted to get signed. And actually, I think I'm out of date because Hicks, I believe, I don't know if he got signed, but he got invited to a mini camp.
A couple of those guys got invited to camps. Yes. Tunstall, Cooper, and I think Hicks as well.
Yeah. So as far as the guys that did get signed in the free agents, Arquan Bush, Ivan Pace, Will Huber went to the Vikings, Lenny Taylor to the Jaguars, Lorenz Metz, to the Bears, and then Charles McClellan to the Titans as well. I know it's pretty hard to make a roster from the undrafted free agency pool, but what kind of chances do you give those guys?
Yeah, I mean, so the one that I think is the most intriguing is Lorenz Metz. He, certainly a project, as he was at UC, coming over from Germany, not really ever playing football, and went through a group of different offensive line coaches. Some who liked him, and I think Coach Fickle liked him. I don't think he was particularly tight with Coach Turner this past year. He didn't get a lot of playing time, and I think that hurt him. But you never know. All of a sudden, he gets a hold of the right coach, and if you look at the last maybe 8, 10 years in the NFL, they drool over guys that are 6'8", 6'9",
Giant.
330 pounds, and the right coach can make him. I honestly, this is no stretch, an all pro. Now, is he at that level right now? No, of course he's not. But he probably is going to get a long, long look. He had some injuries. He doesn't have the quickest feet. So there's some things there that can hurt him. And maybe in the NFL, you don't have the time to cultivate those guys all the way from getting the feet. You're hoping they come to you with that already down. But certainly he has the ability to do that. The other one that I like, that I think has a shot, and maybe just as a special teams guy, and he just gives you all the time 100%, is Will Huber. He played tight end, he played linebacker, he was on every special team you could possibly imagine. And he just is one of those guys that I think might find a spot. Maybe it's only for 2-3 years. He just left UC with his third degree,
Wow.
which is, and he has a real estate license. So, he doesn't have a lot to worry about as far as life, but why not give it a shot? And, I'm not saying that, I think Bush has a really, really good chance of maybe fitting in as a special teams guy. In Taylor's case, he has the body to be there. Now, do they keep a third tight end and just keep him around because he's a really good blocker as well? So all those guys, McClellan, got a speed, a little bit of speed. I think the 2 knee surgeries, hurt him obviously over a period of time. But, in the right situation, in the right effort, those guys can make it.
Last thing I want to talk to you about the draft, and sort of a little bit of a curveball. Before we started recording, I don't even think I threw this at you here, but certainly a ton of people around the city are diving deep into the highlights and the film of all of the picks that the Bengals made over the weekend. Any thoughts on that? I know PFF gave them an A for their draft, so I'm just kind of wondering where your thoughts are for the Bengals.
Well, I mean, a couple things I see. I did not know the young man from Clemson, the number 1 draft choice. I did not know much about him anyway. I mean, I
Miles
knew
Murphy.
who he. Yep. I knew who he was. I understand there's a little going back and forth now on who's going to keep 98, the number 98.
Okay.
Whether Reeder's going to keep it or he said he would sell it to him for the right amount. So we'll see how that goes. The one intriguing thing that I like, it's funny because I was a certain type of player, right? And when I see other players that played like me, I really kind of like focus on them and like them. And that's who the Bengals got in the 4th round, and Charlie Jones from Purdue, transferred in from, I believe, Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. And he gives them a return game, as well as, I'm telling you what, you want to talk about a gutsy guy who's going to go after every ball. Now, does he get in there and play the slot and replace Tyler Boyd? I don't know about that. They also got the receiver from Princeton, who I understand, I can't honestly say I've seen him play, but I understand he's tall and strong. So, I mean, if you look at that you're talking about probably one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the NFL in reference to receivers, and you add those 2 guys into the mix, they're going to be really, really strong. I don't think it's good, speaking of Josh Wiley and LaSalle guys before, I don't think it's a good sign for Chrisman that they drafted a punter in the 6th round. I believe it was the 6th round. And that doesn't mean that he's going to be out, but anytime you draft somebody, that just means you're looking, this is a spot if we can improve. So, but the Bengals have really been good at just picking the best guy available. And maybe they felt that a little bit of competition at the punting side of things, might be what they need. But I think it was a good draft for him. I kind of looked at all those guys, and then again, when you're watching it on TV, all you're seeing is a highlight package. You're seeing every good play.
Right. Exactly.
But I also understand in the NFC North, if you look at what the Ravens did, you look at what the Browns did, you look at what the Steelers did, everybody's getting high grades. So
Yeah.
very competitive division.
I think a lot of people were wondering when and who would be the draft choice, because it seemed like it was inevitable for the Bengals to draft a running back. And I really, really like the guy out of Kansas State, Deuce Vaughn. I
Yeah.
thought you get him in like the middle to late rounds. I think the Cowboys ended up taking him, which is a great pickup for them. And I really wanted him to come to Cincinnati, but they took the guy out of Illinois, Chase Brown, who
Yep.
I haven't looked up or know a whole lot about yet, but hopefully. Hopefully he's sort of the future at the position for us.
Well, I'm the same as you, Brandon. I did not know the young man, but then through the draft and then watching a little bit afterwards, I found out that he was third team All American. Had his stats are really, really good. And then a little bit about just watching him with his family on the draft. He's a young man that you just can't help but like.
Okay.
I don't know him. I just, everything you see about him looks good. And then when I saw what he was able to do, and I know Illinois they were not great this past year. They haven't been great in a long time. But to give him credit, he really came up with some fabulous stats. You know who I liked was Spears from Tulane. Now, again, that's
Yeah.
because him being in the American Conference and watching him beat up on UC for 3 years,
Yeah.
you would have liked to seen the Bengals take him. I think it appears the Bengals are going to stick with Joe Mixon, even though they lost P. Ryan, who I thought was really, really good. And the one thing I don't know that much about the young man from Illinois as far as his pass catching ability, but the Bengals really, really rely on their backs to catch the football.
Yeah.
When I look at both P. Ryan and Mixon's numbers from last year as receivers out of the backfield, they had over 100 catches between them. So, I mean, it's, Burrow has to check down a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
tight ends, one of those things, not to mention your slot receiver. Obviously, your wideouts can break routes off at all, but being able to throw to your running backs, that's a huge, huge advantage.
For sure. Jim, let's switch gears here. I think we covered the draft pretty well. I want to get your thoughts as sort of the last thing that we talk about. I want to get your thoughts on this year's Bearcats football team. I'm sure that you had the chance to go to some spring practices and at least the spring game. I was at the spring game, had a great time, and just tell me sort of what stood out to you, what some of your observations were in getting a look at a team. I know it's so hard. I didn't. I joked about printing off a roster when I went to the spring game because of all the turnover, and even the guys that stayed. It seems like they all changed numbers. So I know there's a lot to keep track of here in terms of the roster, and even the coaching staff. Add that in there. Um,
Right,
I guess,
right.
were you able to take anything from it? What do you have as far as observations?
Yeah, that's really a tough one. Let's go back to the beginning. Coaching change. The number one question I get asked, what do you think of the new coach?
Sure.
And it is so hard to answer that question. Let's put it this way. Very nice man. Love being around him. I honestly believe the coaching staff that he brought in, and even though, staff number one, three of those guys left, one got an opportunity in the NFL, one got an opportunity to go from a defensive position coach to a coordinator, and the third one was able to upgrade from, I guess you'd call it an upgrade from Cincinnati. At least it's an upgrade in weather to the Miami Hurricanes. Um,
Right.
so those, you understand that, but then they filled those spots back in. I really like this coaching staff. That crew that came from Louisville, I really like them. I mean, and this defense is going to be really, really good. Now, and like I said, Coach Satterfield, here's the other part about him. I love the philosophy. He calls the plays, as we know. He has an offensive coordinator, but he's going to be the guy calling the plays. It's collaborative, but at the same time, it's his decision. He's got a philosophy that I really, really like. Now, he's able to adjust it based on personnel. So let's go back to last year. We had two very, very different quarterbacks. We had Ben Bryant, stay in the pocket, throw the ball down the field. We had Evan Prater, you know, I'll try to throw the ball down the field, but if I feel pressure, I'm going to get out. I'm going to run. I'm going to throw the ball on the run. Well, what Coach Satterfield, he wants to be able to do is to find that guy. Okay, who's my one guy that's going to be that quarterback? And then I'll build that system around you. He was able to do that with Malik Cunningham at Louisville. But at the same time, Cunningham was hurt a bit, and he had other guys that were similar to Ben Bryant that had to stay in the pocket and throw the ball a little bit more, that weren't quite as mobile. So I think they're going to be in really, really good shape there. The one thing that's so hard to judge right now, so first of all, when Coach Fickle left, horrible situation, would have loved to have seen him stay, but, nothing I say is going to change that. And now with the transfer portal, so many guys left. And you mentioned the wide receiver room before. Pretty much everybody that had been on that was still remaining at Cincinnati as a wideout after Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker and the two tight ends, Lenny Taylor and Josh Wiley, they're all gone, every one of them. So that, and you add only 15 practices for spring ball, which is not many at all. It's so hard to really get a handle on it. And if you were at the spring game, and you mentioned you were, Brandon, you saw that it was situational. There was backed up against our goal line. There was goal line plays. It was set up to be more of, okay, we're going to showcase everybody. We're going to give you a game, but we're going to do it in certain ways that really don't look like a game, because these are situations that we're faced with when we get on the field, but it's not like we're starting at our own 20 and driving the length of the field every time. So, to be honest, I think he did the right thing. He utilized that spring game as a showcase, but as a last practice. And you saw what you have. He has 6 quarterbacks. Last year at the end of the year, there was 3. There's a 7th one coming in who's a preferred walk-on from Kings, who's a very good young football player. But you look at those guys, and Emory Jones is the guy that's probably getting the bulk of the press, transferred in from Arizona State most recently, but had also been at Florida, obviously Ben Bryant. And people hear that Ben's in the transfer portal. They think he's transferring. He may. He's going to do what's best for him, but he doesn't necessarily mean he's leaving. Ben made no if ands or buts about it last year that he wanted to go to the NFL or at least get a shot. That injury at the end of the year prevented him from doing that. So he's going to do whatever he can to try to get one more year. He has one more year of eligibility, whether that's at Cincinnati or somewhere else. And I didn't look today. He may have committed somewhere, but I think he might be back. I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
I've not seen any news yet.
I haven't seen anything either, and I'm guessing if it happens, we'll know. Same with Evan Prater. His elbow was hurt during spring. He really didn't get a chance to play. I don't know what he's thinking. I know he wants to stay here. Whether that's he gets a shot, I don't know. I think he looks at Malik Cunningham last year at quarterback at Louisville and says, I can do that, and Coach Satterfield's here now. Whether that's what he believes, I don't know. But then you mentioned the wide receiver room again, and I'll kind of leave it at that. Each position took a hit as far as guys leaving, but each position also has new guys coming in. And that's quite honestly, the wide receiver room now is full. Okay, how good are they going to be? It's hard to say. It really is. What I look at is the running backs. Those guys have been here for the most part. Ryan Montgomery's back. The guys that they had, they're back. I think they're going to be fine. The offensive line, somewhat solid. The receivers, we don't know. If you get to the defensive line, very, very good. They've got a very, very solid group coming back. Linebackers are good. They got some transfers. They got some holdovers. Secondary needs some work. So, I lost a kicker, but retained a punter. Got a new kicker. He seems to be very, very good. So we'll see. But I think this is the way college football is going to be. We without a coaching change, we could be sitting here saying the same things right now, year after year after year. Because unless the NCAA makes some changes in the transfer portal, meaning that, okay, you're granted one, but then you got to stay, or you've got a petition, which is kind of what they're talking about, but I don't know if they can pull it off, then we're going to be dealing with this every year to some extent, maybe not to this extent with the coach leaving. So I don't know. It's hard to say. They're going to be fine long term. Playing in the Big 12 next year, I would, no offense to the American Conference, I would much rather play that schedule for, for 9 games or 8 games it would have been if you were in that. But now you got 9 conference games and 3 non-conference games. One of your non-conference games is on the road at Pittsburgh, who's an AAC opponent who's, pretty good. So it's going to be a year where they're going to have to win some that they're probably not expected to win, and they're going to have to win all those ones that they're expected to. But, it's where you want it to be. You're Power 5 now. It's where you want it to be.
You're talking about some things that, perfect segue here. One of the last questions I want to ask you here is, as we head into the Big 12, we got a crazy schedule for the first time, and the non-conference, of course, Pitt. What do you think? How should Bearcats fans set their expectations for year one in the Big 12, for year one under Satterfield, and sort of going into the unknown, if you will?
Good question. The one thing about the Big 12 schedule this year, there's 3 teams on the schedule, conference games, that people are familiar with. One is UCF, but they're good. One is Houston, they're good. Or 2 is Houston, they're good. And not really, haven't seen them in a few years, but BYU as well. And they had a down year last year, but they're, year in and year out, they're pretty good. The ones that people don't know about are the traditional Big 12, teams. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Baylor, Kansas State. And I guess you could throw West Virginia into one of those teams that we have seen before. But they're now in the Big 12 for 7-8 years. So they've gotten better. So it's a good conference. And honestly, we don't even go into basketball right now, but in football, it's one of those things where, and I can't speak for this upcoming year. I don't know who's going to be the best, but last year, if you looked at it, any one of those teams could beat the other one. Kansas State had that great year. Baylor had their typical good year. Oklahoma was a little bit down. Oklahoma State was not great. Texas, which of course is leaving, and we don't play. They weren't great last year. But here's the thing. I look at the conference and where we were. Okay, so let's say we didn't get to a New Year's Day 6 game, right? Okay, where would we end up as the second place team in the American? Birmingham, Annapolis. Okay, so a 6-6 Oklahoma team played in the Alamo Bowl, and I may have this reversed. It might have been Texas. A 7-5 Texas team played down in Orlando in the Capital One Bowl. Those are teams that were in the middle of the pack in the Big 12. And look at the bowl games you're getting to go to. Look what the Big 12 brings you. So, that's a long way of saying I don't know. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but 6-6 would be great. And I say that only because of first year of a new coach and all of the turmoil that's gone on with the transfers, not to mention an upgraded schedule and playing in the Big 12 and throw in there Pittsburgh as a non-conference game. I'll take a game in San Antonio, or I'll take a game in Orlando, a bowl game, one of those bowl games. And honestly, if you look at Coach Satterfield, what he's been able to do when he was at Louisville, obviously he had a huge success record at Appalachian State as well. He's been able to put some teams together. So I just think it's, first year moving into the Big 12 with all these changes, all these new players. and a limited spring schedule as far as number of practices, you know, it's going to be a little bit tougher. You know, ask me September 1 after a month out at Higher Ground, I'll have a better idea.
All right. Well, maybe that opens the door. Maybe we talk again after
Sounds
Camp
good.
Higher. For sure. You know, but I want to say I think I 100% agree with you. I don't think you want to fall too far back. You don't want to lose so much momentum. And if I could, you know, not throw shade here, you don't want to be like the basketball program and, you know, fall completely off the grid and then fight and claw your way back, which I think we're doing, and I think we're going to
I
expectations will be even
have to
higher.
give Wes Miller credit, man. He is fighting, and on paper,
Yes.
it's looking good.
Yeah, so you don't want to you don't want a hard reset, but I think if you can manage year one in the Big 12 at 500 and get bowl eligible, I think that is where
I'm with you.
I'll be very very happy with that year one, and you know, you fall back a little bit, right, but you go with all everything considered, you can still build off of a bowl game. You get so many extra practices and the exposure and everything. So I will certainly take 6-6 the first year in the Big 12 under the new coach and everything. So I certainly agree with you there. Last thing I want to ask about, Jim, and maybe you can settle all of the whispers and rumors and everything flying around Bearcat Nation on our Discord, on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. If you're online, you're hearing these whispers. Can you give any insight to the apparel deal that everyone is anxiously awaiting some sort of announcement?
Well, as far as officially, no. As an observer and somebody who's been in the apparel business for a while, and watching some of the things that I saw in Coach Miller having the Jumpman logo on his shirt, and just kind of seeing a little bit more Nike than I used to. I can only say, and this is, I know that there's only, what is it, 3 schools that have the Jumpman for football. I know Michigan, North Carolina, and I don't remember the third.
Is it UCLA?
It might be. It might be.
I don't know. I
Well,
don't know for sure.
there's a lot more basketball schools that do. I would say it's leaning that direction. I don't think your head basketball coach wears that unless there's something going on there. I'm told that the decision is coming,
Okay.
but I do know the Letterman's golf outing was 2 weeks ago, right before Easter, right weekend of the spring game, and all of the Lettermen were given Under Armour apparel with Big 12 logos on it, but that's because the contract's still in effect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a surplus somewhere.
Right. So I don't know. If you're looking for the official answer, it isn't me.
I had to ask. I thought maybe we'd have some breaking news or something that you could
Nope.
give us.
Just kind of an observation on my part. I just think that's where it's leaning. I could be totally wrong.
Jim, the very last thing I want to ask you, you've been gracious with your time and amazing on the show, as always. I know you, we talk plenty about craft beer whenever we talk, and I know you go out, you play different shows at breweries or different happenings around the city. And let anyone know, do you have any shows coming up where people can come out and see you play, or what's going on in that front for you?
Well, let's see. The one that I have most current coming up, most kind of closest, it's a little bit different though. I've been playing at Streetside Brewing maybe every 6 weeks or so. I'm playing there this Sunday, but I'm playing there in the morning for the Flying Pig Marathon. So I will be out on Eastern Avenue from about 8:30 till noon, kind of doing my classic rock and country. And that would be this Sunday, May 7th. That's a good one, but it's a little bit different time. Now, what's the saying, Brandon? You can't drink all day if you don't start early. So
Exactly.
come on out. I'll be there from 8:30 to noon. And then actually the following Friday, which would be the 13th, I'll be at the Common Brewing up in Common Brewing Company up in Mason, Ohio,
Okay.
from 7:30 to 11. So just again, I play you know acoustic classic rock type stuff, and I've got one coming up at Braxton. Over actually the Braxton Barrel House, the one in Fort Mitchell, or I think it's Fort Mitchell. But anyway, I've got those coming up. You can find my whole schedule at jimkellymusic.com. Got a bunch coming up.
Very nice. I will link that in the show notes for this one. Um, I think we'll leave it there, Jim. I certainly appreciate your time. Like
All
I
right.
said,
Well,
I
thanks
will
for having me.
absolutely. I'll definitely reach back out after Camp High Ground and see what sort of the storylines are there. For listeners, like I've promised, I will continue to do weekly shows, keep this thing moving. Next week, if I am not mistaken, we will do another beer focused episode. So, Jim, I don't know if you saw this a couple weeks ago. March 1st Brewing, they do the Astra seltzers, and my friend Kat and we sampled all 13 of them that they put in cans. So we're going to do another beer focused episode next week here in the off season to sort of supplement what we're covering. And I think the topic is pretty good. I'm not going to give any hints away, but certainly if you're an IPA drinker in the city, you might want to tune into this one because we'll be debating some IPAs in the show.
Well, fantastic. I love the fact that you incorporate beer and sports, so it couldn't be any better. That's two of my favorites.
Absolutely. All right. I will leave you guys with this as always. Jim, thank you. Cheers and go Bearcats.